Good evening, Central. This is the day that the Lord has made. Yes, and I choose to rejoice and be glad in it. I want to welcome those that are here tonight and those watching online. I hope everybody's having a great week so far. Everybody's having a great week out there? Doing good so far? Recovering? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we had an awesome prayer meeting Monday night. It was really good. God showed up. Hallelujah. It was just an awesome time. I don't have a sheet for announcements. Is there a men's meeting this week? Tuesday night? Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Okay. So that's the first Tuesday of the month, and then Prime Timers is another week away after that. So check online for other times and anything else that we have to announce on our Facebook page. So tonight we're in our third week of this 8-week series in biblical citizenship, and tonight's class is going to be covering over understanding the times. And I think it's pretty important that the times that we live in. I don't know if you've been watching the Olympics, hopefully not, but if you have, it's been a pretty crazy thing. I don't know if you've heard about the female boxer who had to go against the male boxer, but that was a thing. And that poor woman, she was just brutally beaten down. And it's crazy what they're doing, not just to this country, but everything that's going on in the world today. So if you don't have a book, the books are actually located back there now on the sound booth back there in the back. And this week's Bible verse is a really good one. It's out of 1 Chronicles 12:32. I like it better in the NLT. And so in the NLT it says, from the tribe of Issachar there were 200 leaders of all the tribe with their relatives. All these men understood the signs of the times and knew the best course for Israel to take. So hopefully we can all see the signs that's going on in this world today. And maybe we can be like the sons of Issachar and know how to navigate the season that we're in. And hopefully these videos that we're watching will kind of help out with that. So praise God. Anyway, in tonight's video, we're going to hear again from David Barton, who will talk about the attack on truth that is going on here in America. And we're also going to see Rick Green. He's going to be in the area where the very room that they signed the Declaration of Independence, and he's going to be talking about that. So it's going to be a pretty cool night. It's going to be a very long night. This video is actually an hour and 30 minutes, roughly. So I'm going to jump right into prayer real quick and get this video started. So thank you, Father, for this evening. God, thank you for the opportunity once again and time to be gathered here tonight with all these wonderful folks. God, thank you for protecting this country, for loving us so greatly that we can live in freedom and have the opportunity to learn about your word and learn about what you've done in this country to build a foundation for us to live in and thrive in. Thank you, Father, for just sharing this knowledge with us tonight. And God, I just ask that you would bless every single person here with additional knowledge, that we all walk away with something new, like we have been for the past couple of weeks. We've learned all sorts of things. And so, Father God, I pray that continues tonight. Father, I thank you. We love you. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Welcome to week 3 of biblical citizenship. We are having a great time learning the truth of what the Bible says about how we should act as citizens. And last week, wow, we went into that amazing Wall Builders Museum and Library, and David took us through the biblical view of the different spheres of government and then taught us how to tend the garden. So important. And then Tim Barton gave us that response to the 1619 Project, and he gave us the truth about American history. He answered that question, is America worth saving? And I don't know about you guys, but I was blown away by the human interest stories, the facts, the data, all the things I didn't even know about America ending slavery. How many of us knew that we were the first ones to end the slave trade, that we were fourth in the world to end slavery completely? You know, we've been taught for so long that we had to be dragged kicking and screaming as the last ones to end it. So all of those truth bombs from last week in the library were just amazing. And we're going to try to top it this week. We're going to try to do even more. We're going to take it to a whole nother level. We're actually going to go to the room, Independence Hall, where the Constitution and the Declaration were both created. That very room where the Founding Fathers hammered out the philosophy of America in the Declaration of Independence, and then they hammered out that rule book 11 years later, our Constitution. So we're going to actually get to go into that room and begin to study those things. And I really wanted to take y'all to the library in Aledo, Texas. I mean, we're going to have David again talking this week about truth and courage. And I wanted y'all to be able to see him in person. So I had a jumbo jet lined up. I was going to take all of us. We were going to get on that jumbo jet. We were going to fly to Texas. We were going to cram into the Wall Builders Museum and Library so that you could see David live. But there is no way I can afford a jumbo jet. So it didn't happen. I didn't really get one. But I did even better. We decided to bring the man himself all the way to California, America's premier historian, teaching tonight right here in our biblical citizenship class on the subject of truth and courage. Would you please welcome America's premier historian, David Barton.
Thanks, bro. Thanks, guys. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Let me take you into what we want to cover tonight. And you can tell from the title of the course, it is biblical citizenship. So we try to cover things from a biblical perspective. I'm a Christian, professing Christian, and I hope we can take those Christian principles, apply them with biblical principles, and come up with good solutions. Now, knowing where the country is today, and one of the things we do a lot of work in is polling. We do a lot of national polling, and polling is a good way to kind of have snapshots of where the nation is. And because we've been doing polling in America for nearly 100 years, we can kind of look back and say, hey, here's what we looked like when we were a lot younger, and here's when we were a little older, and so we can make comparisons. Doing that, I would say that one of the biggest issues facing America today is the issue of truth. Quite frankly, truth is under fire in a way that we have never seen it in American history. When you look at what we have going with truth, I would say, without using any kind of melodramatic hyperbole, because I'm not given to that, truth is on life support. And again, that is because of statistical information. Let me show you some of the polling that's out there. Right now, we know that in America, 3 out of 5 Americans believe that there is no absolute moral truth. Now, here's a problem. No nation has ever survived if it can't get at least half of the nation to agree that certain things are right and wrong. If you have more than half the nation that says, no, there's no right or wrong, then no law means anything. There's not a reason to enforce any law because more than half the people are opposed to it. You have to have a moral basis for what's right and wrong. So here we are with 3 out of 5 Americans thinking that they can make up their own moral truth. They can decide what's right and wrong for them. May not be right and wrong for anybody else, but it's okay for me. You cannot govern a nation that way. It gets even worse when you look at the rising generation. Among millennials, it is 4 and 5 millennials believe there's no absolute moral truth. Now, this is the next generation of everything. This is the next generation of theologians, next generation of pastors, next generation of media, next generation of political guys, next generation of scientists and teachers, you name it. And 4 out of 5 think that there is no absolute moral truth. That, again, that is individually self-determined. And even among Christians, it's shocking to see that it's 1 out of 2 Christians who believe there's no absolute moral truth. Now, for me, I think, wait a minute. Surely you've heard of the 10 Commandments. And apparently, for half Christians, they think the 10 Commandments are the 10 suggestions because there's no absolute moral truth. So we're at a point in time where that objective truth really doesn't matter much anymore. It doesn't matter much with what we see in media, what we see in universities, academia. It doesn't matter much in politics. It should, but it doesn't. And so when you look at where we are with really the lack of objective truth, there's so many examples you can turn to. For example, a decade ago, everybody in America knew that there were 2 genders. Well, just a matter of a few years ago, we stopped counting how many genders there were because there were over 90 different self-identified genders at that point in time being legally recognized. I think even on Facebook, they had 74 different genders you could choose from in your individual profile. So we don't know how many there are today. It's hundreds. It's whatever you determine. So the new really acronym for the movement is not LGBTQ, it's LGBTQIA+. And the IA+ adds the other hundreds of genders that are out there. So we don't even know how many genders there are anymore. In the same way, when we look at things like religion, so many people in America believe no religion's any better than the rest. They're all the same. They're all religions. They're all good. They're all bad, whatever. But there's no distinction among them. And as Christians, we should know better than that. But even with Christians, we find that that's not the case. 80% of Christians say that they believe that religions other than Christianity will get you to heaven. Now, the reason Christianity is unique is because Christianity believes that is the way you're able to go to heaven. But we're saying, no, we don't believe that anymore. It's what we believe for 2,000 years. That's what Jesus taught. That's what the apostles taught. That's what the church taught. But we don't believe that anymore. And so what we see is even 42% of Christians believe that atheists will get into heaven. Now, this is an oxymoronic kind of thing, because atheists don't believe in God, and yet somehow they're going to spend eternity with God. You know, how does that work out? And the 56% of Christians believe that a belief in no religion at all is going to get you to heaven. So it doesn't really matter what you believe. We're apparently all going to heaven. And this is why you see in America there's been such a decline and drop in Christian profession. 20 years ago, 85% of all Americans professed Christianity. Today it's down to 65%. And why would it not keep going down? Because if anything you believe is going to get you to heaven, I don't need to be a Christian to get there. I can just believe what I want to believe. I can make up my own truth. And so what we're seeing is this decline of religion in America because it no longer means anything for many people because, again, they self-define. When you look past religion and go into something like even forms of government, it is amazing to me how many people today are having tattoos put on them of the hammer and sickle, communist tattoos. Do we have no knowledge at all of what communism is, or that in the last century and a half it has killed hundreds of millions of people across the world, and we think that's going to be a good form of government for America? Look at the protests and look what's going on statues. Look what's painted on so many of the statues have been taken down. Communist symbols. And we say, oh, it's just protesters. No, that's a philosophy that they apparently don't understand, because if they think that's a good replacement for what America's been, man, they have no clue of what's going on. But apparently all forms of government are the same. The same when you get to education. We used to have 6 standardized tests in America: the California test, the Iowa test of basic achievement, the California achievement test, Stanford achievement test, etc. And therefore we could compare state to state because we all use the same ruler, the same measurement. We could say, oh, Texas is 23rd and whatever, and California is 47th or 18th, or not anymore. Every state has gone to their own individual state measurement for academics. We can't compare states to states anymore. So we all want to feel good about what we have in school, so we're not looking and saying, well, we're not as good as Alabama, or we're better than Oklahoma. All that's gone. We don't have the comparison by which to use, because in education we've changed all the standards, all the tests, completely different way of looking at things. We don't use truth as the base anymore. In the same way, when you look at morality, I already mentioned that most people don't think there are moral rights and wrongs. When you go to history, we simply cancel what we disagree with. So many of the statues that were torn down apparently were of racists, and you ask the people who tore them down, who's that guy and what to do? So many civil rights statues were torn down, but they just made the assumption if it's a statue, it's a racist. So we're canceling stuff we don't even know what we're canceling. I mean, they tore down a statue of David Farragut in Washington, D.C. because he was a racist. No. He was not part of the Confederacy. He was actually the Union naval commander that led the entire Union forces in defeating the Confederacy. You say you want Confederate statues down. You just tore down the statue of the leading naval guy in the Union, and you tore down the statue of Ulysses S. Grant. I mean, he's the Union commander who defeated the Confederacy. You say all the racism. They don't have a clue. They even tore down the statue of Frederick Douglass, who's a civil rights leader. You're going to tell me he's a racist? See, we just cancel stuff because it's there. We don't even know what it is anymore. And the same way you look at science, we can look at the identical studies in science and come up with very opposite conclusions. We've seen that with everything from masking to climate change to whatever else. You can have this study and come out with 2 opposite sides on it because this is what I want to believe. The same thing with economics. There's 3 primary economic systems in the world, and what happens today in America is we think that any economic system is going to work. Well, we have been the most prosperous nation in the world over the last several decades. Apparently, it's time for a change, because right now we know that 75% of college students want to change to socialism, 69% of millennials want to change to socialism, and 41% of all Americans want to change to socialism. Now, the problem with that is, in the 5,800 years of recorded history, in the history of the world with thousands of nations, you cannot find a single nation that went from free market to socialism that preserved liberty and maintained prosperity. It's never happened in the history of the world. That's all right, we'll get it right. No, we won't. It's going to be the same outcome every time. It's never worked right, and yet we have this thing of we need a massive change. See, we don't even have a perspective for what's right and wrong and what works and what doesn't. Same with ethics. So all these areas we can point to. We see a lot of shifting change there. There's really no absolute truth in any of them anymore. And that's why truth, in fact, is now given way to personal opinion. Now, from a biblical perspective, the Bible has a lot to say about truth. And I want to take you specifically to a passage that's in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. And in the first 10 or so verses, first 9 or 10 verses, is a discussion about the man of lawlessness versus the man of truth. And this conflict is going on between lawlessness and truth. And then after it goes for a while, we get to verse 10, and we find a progression that happens because truth has been presented for several verses, and the other side said, no, I don't believe that's truth, and they rejected truth. And so it's interesting to see what happens in verse 10. It says, they did not receive the love of the truth. So what happens if you get to the point where I don't care if that's truth or not, I disagree with it. If you get to the point where you do not love the truth, you love your opinion or you love something else more than you love truth, notice this next step that happens. It says, for this reason, God will send them strong delusion. If you get to the point where you no longer love truth, then delusion comes. Notice the next step. It says that they should believe the lie. A delusion comes, believe the lie. And then verse 12 says that all might be damned who believe not the truth. Now, damned is the King James word for condemned or judged. So notice the sequence that happens here. If you don't love or if you reject the truth, what happens is a delusion enters. You will believe the lie. You will then act on the lie, and there will be high costs and consequences. Doesn't matter how nice a person you are, how sincere you are. This is just a sequence that's going to happen. Let me take you into science for a bit. I was in science all the way through high school and college. That was my gig. Went to college on a science scholarship. Taught science when I got out. Was school principal, science teacher, basketball coach. In science, we have what are called laws of science. Now, there's not many laws in science, but a law of science, such as the law of gravity, Newton's laws of gravity, it's called a law because it's never in the history of the world been violated, not even once. If a law of science is violated even once, it's no longer a law. It can be in theory, an axiom, or a principle, but a law is something that has never in the history of the world been violated, not even once. If it ever is, it's no longer a law of science. So a law of science it's not an opinion, it is a law. It doesn't really matter what you think about it. It is a law because it is always universally true at all times, all demographics, all situations. It will always be true. Having said that, I must say that our technology that we have today is so far ahead of where we've been in previous generations. One of our friends is Charlie Duke. Charlie Duke went to the moon on Apollo 16. He was one of the 12 guys that walked on the surface of the moon. He was the youngest moonwalker. And was talking to Charlie about what's happening with space stuff today, the Space Force, etc. And it is amazing what we've done. He just pulled out his phone and said, see that phone right there? He says, this little smart device that every one of us have, sometimes have more than one, he says there is more technology in this smart device than we had in several rooms of computers at NASA when we went to the moon. What we have right there is more than we had to send guys to the moon and bring them back. So our technology has certainly changed, and we've advanced in ways that we heard, for example, we heard presidents say, well, it's time to put a woman on the moon. It's time to put an American on Mars. You start thinking about all the things we're doing in space and the Space Force, and again, talking to Charlie Duke, he was explaining to me what we can do in space and what's out there in Space Force, and it's just unbelievable stuff. It is science fiction kind of stuff that's coming real. So as I look at Newton's laws of gravity, I'm not sure that they have the same impact they did in previous generations because our technology is so much better. Matter of fact, I reject the law of gravity. I don't think that it holds any kind of impact on us anymore because we can get past it with technology. Now, here's the deal. Here's what happens. If I say there's no law of gravity, the next logical step is I'll say, well, the law of gravity doesn't affect me because there is no law of gravity. And if I say the law of gravity doesn't affect me, then I'll say I can do what I want. And quite frankly, I've always wanted to be able to jump off a building and soar. I've wanted to do that since I saw Superman as a kid. So I'm going to jump off a building and I am going to soar all the way until I splat on the sidewalk at the bottom. See, as a result of believing that, I'll act on it, and as a result, I will die. And it really doesn't matter how sincere I am in my beliefs. It doesn't matter that I have a good heart. It doesn't matter. The sequence is there. If I reject the truth, then a delusion will enter. If I believe the lie, I'll act on the lie. It will be a high cost and consequence. So there are universal truths. There are moral truths that are out there. I may disagree with them, may not like them, but you have to find truth and love truth more than you love anything else, more than you love your own political opinion, more than you love your opinion of science. You have to find what truth is and go in that direction. And again, it does not matter how sincere you are, and it doesn't matter how much your personal truth is there. Objective truth will win every time. Now, what it may do is destroy the culture in the meantime. If you get away from objective truth and start believing in personal truth, you may lose the culture. You may lose everything the nation's been. You have to have a stable foundation. You can't change foundations on whim and will. So what happens is, no matter the size of the lie that you believe, it will always cause some degree of harm. Even if it's a little white lie. Yeah, a little white lie will grow into bigger stuff and bigger stuff. So you always have to have an absolute love for the truth. That's something we have to really learn to identify as citizens. We'll talk about later about how you find the truth, because that's a difficult thing now. But when you look at truth for Christians, there are sources of truth that we know about. When we talk about truth, we have passages in the Bible, like John 17:17, where the Bible says, Jesus talking, it says, sanctify them by the truth. Thy word is truth. So Jesus says God's word is true. One of the things we talked about in previous sessions is how the Bible does apply to everything. Some of the greatest philosophers in American history used the Bible for economic basis. The Pilgrims used it to create the free market system, 1627. The Pilgrims used it to be able to have equality. While Jamestown brought slavery in 1619, as Tim talked about last week, the Plymouth model is exactly the opposite. They said all men are created equal. That's lines we hear from the Declaration because of what we see in Acts 17:26 and what the Bible says in Revelation 7:9 about equality of mankind. So many ideas came out of the Bible, including forms of government. In the Bible, you'll see 7 different forms of government illustrated, but some forms of government are shown to be much superior than others. And our founding fathers chose what they believed to be the best form, which is a constitutional republic. They pointed to Exodus 18:21 as the reason for choosing that form. You'll also find it in Deuteronomy 1:15-16, Deuteronomy 16:18. So the Bible applies to all aspects of life. So truth, we believe, comes out of the Bible for everything we need, not just theological truth, all sorts of truth, science, everything else. In the same way, we're told in John 14:6, Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father but by me. And by the way, this is a claim of exclusivity. Jesus is saying nobody gets to heaven except by me. And so Christians will say, well, I don't believe that. I believe anything you believe will get you to heaven, which is what 80% of Christians, they're contradicting the truth. Jesus is the truth personified. So if you're interested in truth, all right, you go to God's Word, you go to the person of Jesus Christ. This is where you find truth. And as you find truth there for Christians, this is the difficulty we have today. As you look at the Bible today, only 9% of Christians read the Bible on a daily basis. So with only 9% of Christians reading the Bible on a daily basis, most have no idea what objective truth is. They don't know, for example, what the Bible says about issues like immigration. They have no clue the fact that in the Bible there were 3 different types of immigrant levels, what we call the native-born citizen, what was the naturalized citizen, and what was a green card. The kind of policy we have today came from the Bible a long time ago. There's so much in the Bible that deals with criminal justice, even what we do with the due process rights and Bill of Rights, the 4th through the 8th Amendment, even the U.S. Code annotated federal practice and procedure points back to verses in the Bible is why we have due process rights. But see, we don't know the Bible today, so we don't even know how practical it is in every area of life. So not knowing the Bible, it's not surprising that only 6% of Americans have a biblical worldview. That is, even with 65% of Americans professing Christianity, only 1 out of 16 Americans actually sees things from the same perspective God sees when he gives it to us in his Word. So we're not even thinking like the way he wants us to think because we're not in his Word. So having said that, his Word is a good place for truth, and this is where, when you have his Word, it trumps my opinions. It's like the laws of science. When I was in science, it doesn't matter what my opinion is about gravity. It's a law. It's going to be there. And I can say all day long, I want to fly from a building, but I will hit the ground every time I jump off unless I have some kind of technology to get me temporarily past that. It doesn't change the law of science, though. So the supremacy of personal opinion has to go away. So this is why what I want to hit tonight is we have to develop a love for the truth. We have to be able to conform and change our own thinking, our own action, our own behavior, even our own political affiliation if we need to conform to what truth is. It doesn't matter what any party says, and right now we know that there's 17 different types of political parties in America. Doesn't matter what they say, what is truth? Align yourself with truth wherever that may be. Now, having said that, finding the truth is the biggest problem we have today. Because if I tell you you need to believe the truth, the question should be, well, how do I know it's true? Good question. How do you know it's true? I can look it up on the web, and instantly I can come to 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 memes that will say whatever my viewpoint is. Does that mean it's truth because I can find it out there on the web? No, not at all. Not by a long shot. As a matter of fact, as we have seen big tech start to deplatform more than 70,000 individuals and groups off the platform because of what they believe. As we see that going on, there's also a definite bias that goes in even your searches. So if you're looking for truth, for example, in writing a book, we do a lot of writing, and I was recently working on a guy named John Clem. And John Clem, or John Clum, actually, John Clum was an Indian agent back at the time of Geronimo. He's the only guy ever to capture Geronimo. And he was a strong Christian guy. He was actually chosen by the government to go in and handle the reservation because, unlike the other Indian agents, he wasn't going to be bribed or bought off. He was going to do the right thing. He had integrity. It's a great story. So I went on, I had Bing up as a search service. I looked for John Clum Christian. Couldn't get a single hit. That's interesting. So I just went over to DuckDuckGo and tried it on DuckDuckGo, and all sorts of articles popped up about John Clum the Christian. Interesting. I'll look for that topic on Bing, and it's cut out. The same way, I was writing about Hollywood and how different Hollywood used to be. As a matter of fact, there's about 24 guys who won the Academy Award back in the golden age of Hollywood that were veterans. We loved America. We promoted America. So many faith movies back in those days. We believed, as George Washington said, that religion and morality were the foundation of patriotism. That's what he said in his farewell address. So Hollywood used to promote that. And one of the guys who helped do that was a guy named Cecil B. DeMille. Cecil B. DeMille directed 81 movies. He was nominated for 3 Academy Awards, The Greatest Show on Earth, and The 10 Commandments, and all these great movies he did. And he's a strong Christian guy. As a matter of fact, after he did the movie 10 Commandments, Yul Brynner, who was one of the stars in that movie, Charlton Heston, another star, the 3 of them went around the United States erecting 10 Commandments monuments all over the United States. Some accounts say they erected more than 4,000 10 Commandments monuments in parks everywhere. When the case went to the Supreme Court a few years ago about whether Texas could have a 10 Commandments out on its courtyard there in the capital area, it was 10 Commandments that was part of what had been erected back there when the Hollywood guys were actually erecting 10 Commandments. That's what led to the Supreme Court case. So I know that Cecil B. DeMille, very strong faith guy. So on Bing, I look up Cecil B. DeMille Christian. Nothing comes up. I go to DuckDuckGo, Cecil B. DeMille Christian, listing all over the place. So you actually now have to find out, how do you find truth? How do you go to a source of truth? Because you can't just trust the first thing that pops up anymore, because algorithms are changed in such a way. This is where you have to go back to original document. If it was a trial, what you do is you throw out all hearsay evidence, and you have to have primary first source evidence from an eyewitness. We don't allow somebody who are second or third hand or whatever. You got to go to somebody who is an expert on that, who actually saw it happen and was there. And that's why with what we have at Walbo, there's a collection you saw last week. We've got more than 100,000 items that predate 1812. So if you want to know what the Founding Fathers thought about judicial activism, or what they thought about immigration or anything else, let's just go get the original documents and read it in their own handwriting. That's one way you find truth. So what happens is, to find the truth today is now becoming hard work, because you're going to hear all sorts of things, and then you're going to hear even conservative media pick it up and say it. And just because 3 or 4 conservative channels say it doesn't mean it's more any right than 3 or 4 progressive channels say it. You have to be able to say what is the truth. And I find I tend to be a conservative. That's not what I call myself. That's what everybody else calls me. I just hold beliefs that I think are consistent with the Constitution and the Bible, which that would put me in the conservative camp today. I would point out that actually being called a conservative, progressive, anything else, while it's helpful for identification, it really means nothing. I've got a friend who serves in Parliament in Australia who believes exactly what I believe, which over in Australia, that means you're a member of the Liberal Party. The liberal party is the party that believes in biblical morality and biblical principles. So the names we stick on labels really doesn't matter as much as what the beliefs are. So even as a conservative, I find that there are so many of my conservative news outlets, I go, no, that's actually not true. Actually, here's what the Founding Fathers said about the issue of filibusters in the Senate. And while you may be conservative and you may be chewing up Schumer in the Senate for trying to break the filibuster rule, here's actually what the Founding Fathers said about that. That's not, to me, a conservative liberal issue. That's a truth issue that goes back to what the actual debates were when it actually happened. So that's part of what we have to do, is we have to put hard work in. You see, in America, we've had good intentions for so long that we've really been coasting on these good intentions. Oh, we know that our teacher's not lying to us. We know that the media is not really lying to us. Well, not anymore. We can't make those assumptions in any area anymore. See, as good-hearted people, we want to assume the best of other people. And in doing that, we often buy a lot of garbage. It's really not true, because we're assuming, I've got a good car. I wouldn't deliberately lie to somebody. They wouldn't do it to me. Yeah, they would. And so what has to happen now is you can't coast with good intentions anymore. You have to say, wait a minute, time out. I need to find out if that's true. I love the passage in Acts 17:21, or 17:11, Acts 17:11, where Paul, on his second missionary journey, as he's going from place to place. Remember, Paul is the most credentialed apostle in Christianity. He's the guy with all the PhDs after his name. He was raised at the foot of Gamaliel, who was a great thinker, great legal scholar, great biblical scholar. Paul had all the credentials. He was a Pharisee of the Pharisees. Everything was there. And when he was talking about the Bereans on his second missionary journey, he said, I love these guys. He said, they don't believe anything I tell them until after they go check the scriptures to see if I was telling them the truth. And Paul said that those in Berea were more noble than those even in Thessalonica. And we have the books in the Bible, the 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and those in Thessalonica. Paul said, these guys in Berea are more noble than even the guys in Thessalonica, because they won't believe anything I tell them until they go check the scriptures for themselves to see if it's true. See, that's the attitude you get. What I'm telling you tonight, you need to go check and see if this is true. You need to find out if I'm telling you. You can't just assume that people are telling you the truth. That's what we've coasted on for a long time, and look where we are now as a result. We don't even recognize evil intent when it comes anymore. So what has to happen is we have to find the truth. So you have to love the truth, you have to find the truth, and the third thing we have to do is we have to defend the truth. Defending the truth takes a lot of courage. This is a different time in our history, unlike any other time. Recent polling tells us that 77% of traditional value Americans now self-censor because of the current hostility that's out there. We've seen 70,000 people and groups be deplatformed. I'm going to have to tone it down a little bit, otherwise I won't have any friends left to talk to. I've got 200 reach that I can get here, and so I got to tone it down so I can keep my 200. And so what happens is we're backing away from the message. We're backing away from confronting what the truth is, and we're going more into what they want us to say so that we can keep a position of not losing all of our voice. That's not the right thing to do. You can't be backed up and you can't be intimidated. And now that's what we find is Americans are self-censoring because of the climate. That, if I say this, I'm going to get attacked on Facebook. If I say this, they're going to launch on me. Whatever it is, you can't self-censor anymore. It's interesting that in the Bible, and the Bible tells us so much, and not even just about the practical things like economics, the other things we talked about, government, law, but it tells us even about spiritual things like heaven and hell. And according to the Bible, heaven and hell, they are very real places. We know about heaven, we know about Jesus and how we get to heaven, but hell, we don't always spend a lot of time on hell. We know that it exists, and yet the Bible tells us that is a very real place. It's just as real as what we believe heaven to be. As a matter of fact, if you look in the book of Revelation, chapter 21, verse 8, in the book of Revelation, it talks about the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is a second death. That's hell. That's describing hell. In that verse, who is it that goes to hell? According to that verse, you read the first part of the verse, it says, well, the faithless, the detestable, the murderers, the sexually immoral, the sorcerers, the idolaters, and all liars. That's some bad folks. A murderer and liars and perjurers, and those are folks that go to hell. You may notice that there's a blank at the top there. You see that blank at the top? What is it that starts the list of who gets sent to hell? The first thing on the list is cowards and fearful. All the other people go there for what they do. They killed someone. They are liars. They're perjurers. These folks go there for what they didn't do. They didn't have any backbone. They wouldn't stand up. They were cowards. They were fearful. It's interesting to me that God puts that at the top of the list of stuff he doesn't like. And this is what will get you sent to hell. Wow. We need to develop a backbone. Imagine if the founding fathers had the same attitude that so many conservatives today have. We'd still be part of the British, we'd still be British colonies. And I'm not saying that we need to go out and have confrontation and we need to have violent stuff and have a revolution. By the way, we don't even understand that. Those guys worked 11 years to not get into a conflict. After the British started coming after them 11 years later, they're still trying peaceful reconciliation. Matter of fact, 6 years after the British started firing bullets at them, they were still trying to reconcile. They weren't looking to split, but once they got pushed so far, that's the only thing they could do and stand with integrity. And so you have to have some point at which you say, you know what, I'm not crossing this line with social media. I'm not crossing this line with the school district. They're not going to talk me into whatever. Whatever it is, you have to take a position, and you can't be fearful and you can't be a coward. So that's what the Bible tells us, and that's why courage is the third thing that I'll point out. So in talking about truth, just to hit this again real quickly, you have to love truth above your own opinion. You have to be willing to change. That's some of the hardest decisions to make, is that I have to give up something I've believed for much of my life because I now find I'm wrong. You have to be willing to love the truth, but then you now have to be able to find the truth. And this is, we've never been at a point in America where this is the situation we have now. There's so many lies out there that are presented as truth that how do we know what's true and what's not? This is where it's going to take a lot of hard work to find the truth. We've got to put more effort into being a citizen than we've ever had to do in our entire life, more effort into being a Christian than we have our entire life. And then once we do that, we have to defend the truth. And defending the truth takes a lot of backbone, a lot of courage, particularly in a nation that's as polarized as we are now. You see, when 3 out of 5 Americans believe there is no absolute truth, for you to defend it, it means 60% is going to be against you, because they think absolute truth is determined by them, not by any objective standard. So just tell you, you're going to be in the minority when you start standing up for truth, even if it's among your own folks. You know, I kind of look at what happened with Moses as a great example. I've been involved in politics. I've been involved in church, held a lot of church positions, held a lot of political positions. In both positions, the motto I put up in my office wall is, I don't need enemies. I have friends. And often, it's the friends that attack you worse than your enemies do. I've learned in both politics and church, I really need bulletproof vests. And I always wear them to the back because it's a friendly fire that kills you. You know, you look at Moses. Moses only had to fight the Egyptians one time. He fought his own people for 40 years. And that's the way it is. You start standing for truth, and you're going to have a lot of opposition, even from people that should be on your side. Just because they oppose you doesn't mean they won't change eventually. You just keep standing firm and keep making your articulate arguments. You keep reasoning, keep presenting truth, and you'll find that people eventually shift and come back in the right direction, because what you're saying the first time, they've never heard before. So they're going to reject it, because I've never heard that. Understand? So let me explain it to you a different way. Let me come at it from this direction. See, you just have to be faithful to hang in there and keep saying the truth, keep defending the truth, keep speaking the truth, keep having courage with truth. You'll find that you'll start developing a following. They'll come behind you and say, you know, you're right. I used to believe you were really crazy, but now I find that what you said is true. That's the kind of tenacity we have to have with truth. So I encourage you to love the truth, to spend the effort to find the truth, and then to defend the truth. If you're interested, the book we have, The American Story, it's all about truth of what happened in America. It's a counter-narrative of the 1619 Project, and it's not based on our opinions. There's more than 1,000 footnotes in there that go back to original sources. So you can check it yourself. We encourage you to do that. And then seeing how the Bible relates to every aspect of life is why we did the Founders Bible. It takes the Bible verses, shows what goes with immigration or economics or civil justice or education or anything else. Bible is a great book. So I encourage you to get into those books, study them. If you need resources, it's a great place to go. God bless you guys. Thanks for letting me share with you.
Welcome to Constitution Alive, the Citizen's Guide to America's Founding Documents. We are here in one of the most amazing libraries on the planet with one of the foremost experts on the Founding Fathers and our founding documents, David Barton. David, thank you so much for having us here.
Hey, good to be here, Rick. Thanks for having me, bro.
So why do you dive into so much history? Why spend so much time in the past?
You know, the reason we do that is because we have been the most successful nation in the history of the world to this point, and there's a reason for that. And our objective with what we want to do, our objective is really well stated by John Jay. And John Jay became the original Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, but at the time they wrote the Constitution, he and James Madison, Alexander Hamilton did the Federalist Papers, and that was to explain to America what the Constitution is all about. So he's really one of the three guys most responsible for the adoption of the Constitution through those Federalist Papers. He had a great statement on why we study this type of stuff, and this is the statement he made. He said, every member of the state ought diligently to read and to study the Constitution of his country and teach the rising generation to be free. Now, it's interesting. He relates being free to knowing the Constitution. You ought to know the Constitution and teach the next generation if you intend to be free. He says, by knowing their rights, they will sooner perceive when they're violated and be the better prepared to defend and assert them. Now, that's really the objective of what we're doing in all these next lessons that come along. And there's 6 verbs that he has in there that will be really the guideline for what every citizen needs to shoot for. So the 6 verbs.
So this will really drive everything we do for the rest of this course then. This is our outline.
That's the outline. He says, first you want to read the Constitution of your country. You want to read and study it. And it's one thing to read it, it's another thing to study it. So read is like a quick perusal, but study is get to know it. And then he says, and then you want to be able to teach it. You want to be able to take the next generation and say, hey guys, here's what you need to know. Here's the document you need to know. Here's the principles. This is what will keep you free. And this is the formula that's produced American success. Then he says, when you do that, then you'll know your rights. And when you know your rights, you'll perceive when they're being violated, and then you'll be prepared to defend and to assert them. And there's a big difference between defend and assert. Defend is on defense. I'll defend my rights. Assert them as I'm going on offense to make sure I defend your rights.
Which we need to do more of.
And that's what we need.
If that's what's going to keep us free, this part is where we're really losing out, teaching the rising generation to be free. If we don't have a good education system, if we're not teaching what's in this room, we're losing the formula.
Well, you hit the education system, let's just be real blunt. We spend up to $120,000 over the educational course of a kid to go to school for 12 years. We're not getting our money's worth.
Yeah, that's in some of our less expensive districts.
Well, that's right. That's the average nationally. So it's going to be up or down in some. Washington, D.C. is way more than that. So it depends on the district you're in. But what we know is that every state constitution says that the purpose of public education is to prepare active and informed citizens.
So we started those education systems to do exactly what John Jay is saying here.
But what we know right now is if you look at recent elections, those who have gone through our public education system, you're looking right now at 70% that do not know the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. So
we're definitely failing on teaching the rising generation.
You're looking at 65% that cannot even tell you what the role of the judiciary is. That's one of the 3 branches. As a matter of fact, speaking of one of the 3 branches, 62% of those who have gone through public education cannot even name the 3 branches of government.
More than half. And they can't do, so you definitely don't know what those branches are supposed to do if you don't even know what they are. Yeah.
48% of elected officials cannot name the 3 branches of government.
That's half of our actual public servants in office.
If you don't know the 3 branches, you don't know checks and balances, you don't know functions, you don't know what the Constitution, and that's why you read and study the Constitution, you teach it the rising generation.
Well, maybe they devalue what is in here because they think, look, this is old stuff. I mean, I hear that all the time. It's 200 years old, doesn't apply today. Why should I pay attention to all this stuff that happened 200 years ago?
And let me just one more time hit this because this is our objective, and we're going to look at old stuff. So, number 1, read the Constitution. 2, study the Constitution. 3, teach the Constitution, especially the rising generation, but maybe to the burger flippers beside you, maybe to the mechanics in the shop where you work.
Not only the next generation, your generation.
Because we're at a point now where public education is not taught us. So we got to just teach the Constitution. But once we do that, we want to know our constitutional rights, we want to defend our constitutional rights, and assert our constitutional rights. Now, that's what we're after. But you've raised the issue up, you know, it's a really old document, and we hear that. Because, you know, the Founding Fathers, when they did this Constitution, they didn't have internet. I mean, fastest transportation,
no airplanes,
they had horses, you know. So what can we... I've been involved in a number of court cases, state and federal courts, on issues of history, original intent. And one of those issues is the issue of the 10 Commandments. Because for generations in America, you're more likely to find a copy of the 10 Commandments hanging in a civic building than in a religious building. And that's just the way it was. I mean, the 10 Commandments are considered the foundation of law. And so in so many of these places where the 10 Commandments has been hanging, there's now a lawsuit saying, oh, you can't do that. That's religious. You have to take that down. So in going through and telling the judge, no, here's the first law book in America. It goes back to the Code of 1650, and it quotes the 10 Commandments all the way through. Now, you take the 10 Commandments and look at the 10 Commandments. You know, I think that thing about honoring father and mother still works. I think thou shalt not kill still works.
There's not one of those that doesn't work
every one of those
today.
still works today. And the reason is they're not drawn on specifics, they're drawn on principles. They take timeless principles because the nature of man doesn't change. We still kill people, we still steal, we still perjure, we still disrespect parents. That's why it works. That's the way the Constitution is. The Founding Fathers didn't give us all these specifics. They gave us these principles of jurisdiction, principles of overview, and that's why it still works more than 2 centuries later. That's why it'll still work 2 centuries from now if we know it and save it and preserve it.
So if they were thinking that way, though, I mean, if they were thinking, okay, we're going to put something in place here that needs to be timeless, that's going to still work 100, 200, 500 years from now, how did they get to that point? I mean, who were these guys to have that kind of...
Let's just take the guys who signed the Declaration. Now, you're going to be doing this class in Independence Hall. Independence Hall is where they signed the Declaration and the Constitutions. When I throw this up at a major law school, really sharp kids, and I'll say, who do you recognize? Everybody can find Jefferson, everybody can find Franklin, and that's where it stops. I go, wait a minute, 56 guys, give me some more. They don't know them. Number one, we've been taught to recognize our 2 least religious founding fathers. So we don't know anything about the other.
Those are the only 2 they really talk about.
That's the only 2 they talk about in schools. And we say, well, how about, let me just take you across the front row. How about Benjamin Harrison here, a great general in the Revolution? Or let's go here to Richard Henry Lee, the guy who actually made the proposal that we separate from Great Britain. He goes on to be one of the framers of the Bill of Rights. You've got the wealthiest man in America right there, Charles Carroll. You've also got one of the poorest guys in America right there with Sam Adams.
Right next to him.
Sam Adams is so poor that when they elected him to Congress, he didn't even have a suit of clothes. His neighbors took up a collection for him to get a suit of clothes. He had to go borrow a horse to ride to Congress. You have John Hancock, who's one of the most famous businessmen in America. So you got businessmen.
Really a mix of
it's
everything in every career, every
you got
profession.
rich, you got poor. As a matter of fact, 29 of these guys out of the 56 had a college degree. So nearly half of them didn't have a college degree. And
that was my next question, was education, because
education.
They didn't all have the best education.
1/4 of these guys were home educated. Several guys. This guy right here, Roger Sherman, the only guy to sign all 4 founding documents, completely self-taught. He never had any formal education. Wow. But they understood the principles, and they got those principles, and they wrote a document that didn't reflect what was going on 200 years ago. It reflected human nature. And one thing about these guys is they were patriots. Yeah. They loved their country, no question about it. And
what does that really mean? I mean, when you say they're patriots, that's a negative to some today. It's a big positive to others.
It's
What's
right.
it mean?
It's Benjamin Rush, I think, is the best guy to explain it, because Benjamin Rush, John Adams said he's one of the 3 most notable founding fathers. John Adams said there's George Washington, Ben Franklin, and Benjamin Rush. We will never stand.
And they're again a name that most people are not going to know, Benjamin Rush.
And they should, because he is the top doctor in American history. 3,000 students got their medical diploma signed by him. He's also the father of public schools under the Constitution. He also started 5 universities, 3 go today. He signed the Declaration. He ratified the Constitution. He served in 3 different presidential administrations. He's the director of the U.S. Mint. He's a huge civil rights leader.
Do that much?
One guy.
I know he's one of your favorite too. You have a book on Benjamin Rush and his life.
We have a lot of books by Benjamin Rush. This is one of the original books that we'll talk about in a minute. But what he does is he says, let me tell you what patriotism is. And so this is what he's teaching the rising generation, because the Founding Fathers understood we got the principles, but if our next generation doesn't understand this, it's not going to work. Yeah. So that's why we put so much time in education.
You got to instill it in each generation.
Here's his definition of patriotism. He says patriotism is as much a virtue as is justice. Now, who would be opposed to justice?
Right.
You know, nobody. He said that's just as much a virtue as justice, and it's just as necessary for the support of societies as natural affection is for the support of families. Imagine trying to keep your family together if you didn't have love in the family. He says, well, imagine trying to keep your country together if you don't have love for your country. You got to have love for your family. You go to the deck for each other in the family. Hey, you got to be willing to do that. And he says, actually, if you're not patriotic, you're selfish. And this is the way he explains it. He says, the amor patria, which is the love of country, the love of your country is both a moral and a religious duty. It comprehends not only the love of our neighbors, but of millions of our fellow creatures, not only of the present, but of future generations. In other words, if you love your country, you're saying, I want what's best for all my neighbors, and I'm going to work my tail off to have a good country because I want my neighbors to be prosperous and safe. I don't want thugs and criminals overrunning them. I want to make sure we got good government. I want to make sure they can keep the money they earn. I want to make sure they got a good education for their kids. And if I love my country, I'm going to fight for those things.
So you're not just thinking of yourself.
Not just
thinking about the other
people.
people.
If it's just me, I'll just go off the grid somewhere. I'll get out and just live my life the way I want to. I'll go right off the grid. No, if I love others, I've got to fight for my country. I've got to be willing to stand and say, and that's what he says, not just for the present, but for future generations. I want to keep these principles alive so that if the Lord tarries for 200 years from now, this country is still working, still the most prosperous, the most stable, the most free in the history of the world. But that's what patriotism is. And that's why he says it's both a social and a religious duty.
Man, there's so much of that wisdom in this room and in these books. We got to come back to it. Now, our next part of this chapter, I have to thank you for, because we were actually sitting in a restaurant. I don't know if you remember this. We were in Nashville, Tennessee. We'd gone out there for you to speak to some legislators, And you and Cheryl and I were sitting in this restaurant. It's that one where they have live music. Do you
Yep.
remember that? The
Yep,
music
I do.
was playing.
I do remember that.
And I was telling you, hey, we've been teaching this Constitution class around. We're going to record it again. And you said, why don't you do it at Independence Hall where the Constitution is framed? I was like, oh, that's a dream. There's no way that would happen. You said, no, I've done it. So you talked me into calling them. I called them. It worked out. And we're going to now be able to go to the very place where all of this happened,
Really
the
cool.
actual room, Independence Hall, and give folks a chance to learn and study the Constitution in the room where it happened. So let's go to Philadelphia for Constitution Alive.
No, the Constitution is so unique. It is the only Constitution that actually limits government. You know, we don't have to empower government. Government on its own will seek power. It will take power. It will grow, as we're seeing happening in the United States. But our Constitution limits the power of government. Part of the problem with people not understanding our founding documents is then they want too much from their government. They want the government to provide things that government is not supposed to be able to provide. And I think that's what we're seeing in America today, is people are wanting the government to provide everything in their lives, and the government is there to actually protect your rights, not to provide you with things, because it allows you to self-actuate, to choose your own path in life. I use the Wright brothers as a great example. Two bicycle mechanics. If you think about it, two bicycle mechanics from Dayton, Ohio achieved what, for centuries, scientists and engineers could not achieve. It's because of the freedom that they have to be able to, as some people say, go outside the box, but I think the Wright brothers didn't have a box whatsoever, and that's the freedom that you get in this nation.
We have to realize how precious the freedom is that we have. And it is the ability, the freedom, frankly, the duty, the opportunity to be able to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with our friends, with our families, in our churches, in our homes, and in the public square. And so that's really how you exercise it. That's how you preserve your freedom, is you exercise your freedom.
We had a unique system that said we are endowed by our Creator with unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There's no other system in the history of the world like that, where we said our rights come from God and not from government. But then they said to secure these rights, governments exist among men. So we have government to secure life, liberty, and property. Life, liberty, and property help us pursue happiness. Creating is how we glorify God.
Welcome to Constitution Alive right here in Independence Hall from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We are in the room where both the Constitution and the Declaration were adopted. This is exciting for me. I hope it's exciting for you. We're very honored to be able to be in this room. I'm actually standing in the very spot where American giants like John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and others actually had the courage to light the torch of freedom. I don't think I can get across to you how excited I am about this. I kind of feel like, and I use sports analogies a lot, so forgive me for that, but I feel like that kid that has finally met their hero, and they're about to get the autograph of their favorite ball player ever, because being in this room is as close as I'm ever going to get to actually shaking the hands of the Founding Fathers. So this is, if I'm a little bit giddy, you'll just have to forgive me tonight. I'm more excited than I thought I would be. I knew I'd be excited, but I'm just kind of in awe of what we're about to do. So I can't help but think as I'm coming in here tonight, and I know it wasn't a true story, and I know it's a bunch of fiction in there, but I was kind of thinking about National Treasure. Remember that movie? You know, Nicolas Cage is running into Independence Hall. He finds those secret spectacles of Benjamin Franklin, and they're able to see the secret and, decode the message on the back of the Declaration of Independence. And I know we're not going to find any secret spectacles of Benjamin Franklin. We're not going to see any secret messages on the back of the Declaration. But I can promise you tonight, what we will find on the front side of the Declaration and the Constitution, in those words that were made available for the whole world to see, we're going to rediscover the secret sauce of American exceptionalism. We're going to find that formula, rediscover and reestablish that formula that made America so successful. So thank you for joining me tonight and being part of it. Those men that gathered in this room on those two occasions and put those documents in place, it wasn't enough just to write those words. The words of the Declaration would just be words on paper in some attic somewhere collecting dust if it hadn't been for the men that sat in this room and were willing to stand for the things that they were saying, willing to bring the words to life by literally putting their lives on the line. And as overwhelmed as I am to be in this room tonight and in the day that we live in, I can only imagine what it would have been like to be in here, in this room, whenever they signed the Declaration of Independence, when they were willing to put their lives behind the words that they were saying. I know we always read in history it was July 4th. Of course, the only guys to sign those few days between the 1st and the 4th was actually Secretary Thompson and John Hancock, the President of Congress. The rest of the guys came back in here on August 2nd. There was 3 or 4 other guys that didn't sign until later, but most all of them came in here on August 2nd. You can imagine that's a little bit different date. I mean, that's a little bit different occasion. It's one thing to vote and say, hey, Hancock, why don't you put your name on that document and send it over to King George. It's another thing to put your name on the line knowing that King George is coming after you put your name there. And they did that. They gathered here, and I love the letter that Benjamin Rush wrote to John Adams. These guys corresponded a lot after the Revolution, and Rush described in this letter what it was like to be in this room that day when they signed the Declaration of Independence. And Rush reminded Adams, he said, you know, when we came in, many believed that it would be our death warrant. He said no one said a word as they were called forward. He said it was totally silent, and Secretary Thompson from the front of the room started on his right over here with New Hampshire, and he said, Josiah Bartlett of New Hampshire. And Bartlett got up, he came forward, he took the pen, he dipped it in the ink, and he signed in total silence the Declaration of Independence. He went back and he sat down, and one by one they came. John Hart of New Jersey. And you can just imagine as they came forward and took the pen out of that silver ink well and dipped it in the ink, and you could hear that pen scratching along the surface of the Declaration. Well, no one said anything. One by one they came. And finally, Elbridge Gerry got up to come forward, and the silence was broken. Now, Elbridge Gerry was not a well-known founding father. We don't talk much about him today at all. He went on to be vice president later, but the only thing you need to know about him for this particular story is that Elbridge Gerry was the smallest of the founders. I mean, he was a little guy. He was not the towering 7-foot Thor-like figure that stands before you here speaking tonight. He was, what are you laughing at? Okay, so all right, I'm a little guy. Okay, I'm 5'8" with my boots on, all right? This guy was even smaller than me. And he gets called forward to sign the Declaration. And then this guy, Benjamin Harrison, Colonel Benjamin Harrison, from over here from Virginia, big guy. I mean, he was the largest of the founders. He hollers out at Gerry just as Gerry's about to sign. Now, this is the most important political moment in the history of the world. I mean, this is a serious occasion. And the big guy from the back of the room says to the little man up front, he says, I shall have a great advantage over you, Mr. Gerry, when we're hung for what we're now doing. By the size and great weight of my body, well, I'll be dead in a minute or two. But by the lightness of yours, you're going to dance in the air for an hour or more before you're finally dead. Only words spoken during the, well, now after the signing, they do say, some say that Franklin said, who sat here, he said, you know, we better all hang together or else we'll surely hang separately. So, I mean, they knew what they were doing when they signed the document. And I'll tell you those two things because I think it's important for us to know that those guys that were in here, they knew what they were doing. They knew this was going to be a death warrant. They knew that by putting their name on the dotted line, they would have to give it all. And I love the fact that when they came up and took that pen and dipped it in the ink, when they signed, it was right beneath that final sentence. It says, in support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Those were true patriots. They were sinners. They were fallen. They made terrible mistakes just like all of us. But they were patriots because they didn't just get excited, you know, sign the petition, go home, forget about it. These guys stood by their signature. Every single one of them. They did not back down. Not one of them failed to follow through on the commitment that they had made. In fact, when you think about the sacrifice that they made, all 56 of them giving of their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor in one way or another, some of them literally giving their lives, many of them giving their entire fortunes. Some of them lost their wives, lost their sons. They sacrificed a lot for us to be free, so that generations later, we could be free. I think sometimes we forget that our freedom's not free. We forget that there have been those that came before us that paid the ultimate price for us to be able to enjoy these blessings of liberty we talk so much about. And it didn't stop in this room. When these guys lit that torch of freedom, there were others that had to come alongside, that had to rally to the cause. In fact, I love what happened a few months later after Washington had begun to finally get his ragtag bunch together and began to be able to do some things, and he had freed Boston. And now, a few months after the signing of the Declaration in September of 1776, he's actually in New York City. And in New York, you've got a situation where the British have attacked at Staten Island. They defeated us at Long Island, and they've pushed Washington back to Manhattan. And now Washington's kind of dug in there. He's trying to figure out what to do next. He needs to know where the British are going to move next. He needs to know where their troop fortifications are, where their movements are, where they may attack next. He doesn't know any of this, and there's only one way he's going to get that kind of information. George Washington needs a spy. But in 1776, a spy was not what we think of today. I don't know about you. When I think of a spy today, I think of a secret agent. I think of one of these cool guys, you know, like Bond or Bourne or you know, I'm thinking of these guys that dress cool. They got all the gadgets. They act cool. They talk cool. I mean, they have gadgets that will allow them to accomplish any mission impossible. I mean, it doesn't, these guys can actually, with their gadgets, they can run down the side of a mile-high building without any problem. And even when they don't have the gadgets, I mean, you got to watch out because these guys can kill you with a paperclip, a toothpick, a magazine. It doesn't matter. They're going to take care of you. And they never lose their cool. Chaos all around them, and they can still ask for a martini. Shaken, not stirred. I don't know how they do it. But I'm in awe of these guys. That's not what it was like in 1776. All right, that's our movies. It sounds pretty. Go back to 1776, man. If you were a spy, you were the lowest of the low. You weren't a military hero. You were a hired gun. You were not somebody that either side trusted. And Washington knew that. He knew that if he sent one of those types of folks, they're going to be killed upon capture. He wasn't even sure he'd get the right information back. What Washington wanted was he wanted one of his trusted officers to step up and volunteer for this mission. But he wasn't about to demand it of him. He wasn't going to demand such a demeaning and dangerous mission. See, if you were killed on the battlefield, there was honor in that. If you were captured as a spy and hung, no honor in that. Your legacy was destroyed. Your reputation was ruined. So Washington's trying to figure out how to do this, talking to some of his officers. One of these guys gets an idea, and he goes back to his tent, and he's got a bunch of his officers there in his tent, and in hushed tones, Colonel Tom Knowlton is telling these guys why he needs somebody to step up and take care of what the general needs. Nobody's willing. In fact, Knowlton finally gives up. He turns to leave. He's going to head back to General Washington, telling him he's failed. And as he turns to leave, this kid standing at the door had come to the meeting late. He was actually ill with a fever, so he arrived at the meeting late. And as Knowlton's about to leave, this kid steps forward and he says, "I will undertake the mission." Now, to really understand what's happening in this tent, you got to understand this was not your ordinary group of officers. This was not your ordinary soldier at the door. In fact, these men were Colonel Tom Knowlton's Rangers. These were the original Special Forces. This was the first group of Army Rangers. They had recently been put together by Washington. These were the guys that were the Special Forces. Now, the only way for me to wrap my head around that, and you know, living in the day that I live in, and trying to think about the Revolutionary era guys, Special Forces, I got to think like this. Okay, maybe you can join me in this. Just think Chuck Norris, but with a ponytail. Okay, that's the only way I can get my head around that. Okay, so you got these Special Forces guys, all these guys with their ponytails. They've gathered in the tent, and Knowlton's trying to find a volunteer. Well, the guy at the door is none other than Captain Nathan Hale. He's only 21 years old. 21 years old. Now, this is a guy that had graduated from Yale at 18. He had studied for the ministry, went to become a teacher for a few years, and he's teaching in New London, Connecticut. And while he's teaching there, the war breaks out. Lexington and Concord happens. Now, he's just halfway through his 19th year when Lexington and Concord breaks out, so he's still a teenager, basically. But when he hears about Lexington and Concord, he shows up at the town hall meeting there in his hometown to discuss what's happening. And this 19-year-old stands up in front of his community, and he says to them, he said, "We should take up arms, we should march immediately, and not lay down those arms until we've achieved independence." Independence? I mean, nobody had uttered the word independent in his hometown yet, but this young man shakes his community from that colonial submission, shakes the hands of his students, and he marches off to war. And now here we are, a year and a half later. He finds himself outside this tent of Colonel Knowlton's, and a buddy of his is actually there. He's also an officer, a guy named William Hull. Captain William Hull had gone to school with him at Yale. And so Hull is trying to talk Captain Hale out of this. He's saying, "You're never going to succeed at this. There's no way you'll accomplish the mission." He said, first of all, he said, "Hale, you're too honest. There's no way you're going to be a good spy. You can't lie. You're going to fail in the mission. Secondly, this is an impossible mission. You're talking, there's no way you're going to achieve. And even," he said, "even if you succeed, your reputation's going to be ruined. Your legacy is ruined. Don't do it. There's no honor in it," he said. Well, Captain Hale said, "There is honor in any mission necessary for the cause of freedom. I will do my duty." Takes off, dresses once again as a teacher, gets across enemy lines, and acts like he's a teacher looking for work. So he goes around New York there, and for about a week, he's mapping out the locations of the British troops. And he gets all of their fortifications, their movements, he gets it all down on paper, stuffs it in his shoe. Then he's sneaking back across enemy lines, and he's captured. Well, evidence is right there on his person. There's no denying what he's there for. So literally that night, they sentence him to hang the next morning. And so that night, he's contemplating his fate. He's saying, "Look, I failed. I failed the mission. I failed the general. I failed the cause for which I the cause I love so much, what can I possibly do? Well, he asked for a member of the clergy he's denied. He asked for a Bible he's denied. He finally gets a couple of pieces of paper, and he's able to write a couple of letters. And as he's writing these letters, he purposes within his heart to do the only thing left that he can do to help the cause. And so the next morning, they're marching him out, and the crowd has begun to gather to witness the hanging. And they give him a chance to say a few last words, and a lot of different people wrote different things about what he said. Apparently, he gave a pretty long speech. I mean, this 21-year-old actually gave an impassioned speech about freedom, about what the American cause of liberty was all about. And he's reaching back into kind of the days of college where he was actually a great orator, and he's reaching back into the rhetoric and some of the things that he had read then, including right here, Joseph Addison's Cato had been a big influence on Washington and the others, and Hale had read that in college. And so here he is, he's giving this speech, and these British soldiers are heckling him. They're mocking him. They're saying, you're wasting your life. They're saying, you're throwing your life away on a worthless cause. You cannot succeed. You're wasting your life. And then, of course, Nathan Hale said those words that we've heard over and over and over again. He said, I only regret that I have but one life to give for my country. One life to give. He accomplished more in that moment than he ever could have with all that intelligence he was bringing back, because those words would be repeated over and over again among the American ranks. They would encourage those that were thinking about not re-upping to re-up and stay in. They encouraged others to get in and fight. And for generations, we've used those words to inspire generations to be willing to give of themselves for others, sometimes to pay the ultimate price in sacrifice. One life to give. We all have but one life to give, don't we? That's all we get. The question is, for what will we give our one life? We're blessed in America that every generation, it seems, there's enough that are willing to be involved, to participate, to sacrifice. Not just give their life on the battlefield, which is huge, of course, but also to live their life and live out the freedom that the others paid for him. And as I think back to these guys in this room, to Nathan Hale and those throughout the Revolutionary period, fast forward to even now, guys like Michael Murphy, the Navy SEAL that received the Medal of Honor after giving his life. And so many of these guys. And really, when you look back over America's history, you think about all of those that sacrificed, the millions that served, 1.2 million that gave it all, that gave their one life for you, for me, for us to be able to enjoy this room tonight. You know, the good book says that there's no greater love that any man has than that he lay down his life for his friends, for, in this case, for his country. And those that serve in our military and in our first responders and on the front lines here in America as well, they are willing to give their one life for us. And I think about that book that James Bradley wrote about his dad, The Flags of Our Fathers, from Iwo Jima. My wife, her grandfather, got a Purple Heart at Iwo Jima, and it really struck me when he talked about that makeshift monument there at Iwo Jima. It said, when you go home, tell them for us and say, for your tomorrow, we gave our today. We gave our one life so you could be free. I don't know about you, but I've always struggled with how to honor those that came before me. I've always struggled with how to obey the biblical command that says, render honor unto whom honor is due. But I think those that sacrifice and that give of themselves for us, they deserve our honor. But I've always wondered how. How do you, I mean, you know, when I meet a veteran, I always say thank you for your service, but it seems so empty. It seems like I'm not, I mean, how do I honor that they were willing to give their life for me? And I had kind of an epiphany moment, if you will, when I was sitting in a movie theater several years ago. You might have saw the movie. You remember the movie Saving Private Ryan? How many of y'all saw that movie, Saving Private Ryan? You remember the storyline, right? This kid has lost all his brothers. He's 19 years old. His brothers have all been killed in action. The Army figures this out. They want to get him out of the theater and get him home. This was the policy after the Sullivan brothers, the actual true story. And so they're trying to get him home to his family as the last surviving son, but they can't find him. And so Tom Hanks' character is a guy named Captain Miller, and his job is to get in there with his team, find Private Ryan, 19-year-old Ryan, and get him home to his family. And so throughout the movie, these guys on Captain Miller's team keep getting knocked off. They're giving their lives. They're sacrificing their lives for this one kid, Private Ryan. And so throughout the movie, you keep seeing all these guys sacrifice their lives. And then at the end of the movie, Captain Miller finds Private Ryan. They're just about to get him out, and Captain Miller gets shot. He dies. But just before he dies, he grabs this kid, this 19-year-old that they had all given their lives for. He pulls him in real close, and he said two words, not just Private Ryan, I think to every one of us in this room, all of you at home watching, he said, earn this. Earn this. They had given their lives for him, and they're saying to him, earn the freedom that we've sacrificed for. And only as Hollywood can do it, they morphed from that young 19-year-old Private Ryan to 50 or 60 years later, an elderly Private Ryan has come back, and he's visiting the grave of Captain Miller. And I remember him kneeling down, and he said to Captain Miller, he said, tell me I've lived a good life. Tell me I've lived a life worthy of the sacrifice that you made for me. Earn this. I think it's time for us to earn the freedom. Some of you that have joined me tonight, you put your lives on the line. You sacrificed for my freedom. You were willing to give your life. Many that are at home watching, willing to do that. We want to earn the freedom that we've been given. How do we do that? I think Abraham Lincoln probably said it better than anybody. He said, it is from these honored dead that we take increased devotion to the cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. He's saying the way we honor those that came before us is we take increased devotion to the cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. The cause that started right here in this room. The cause of liberty, the cause of freedom. We increase our devotion to that cause. That's how we honor what they did for us. And that's why we're here tonight. We're here to honor them and to say, look, they gave their one life for us. What can we do? What can we as citizens do? How do we give our lives, live our lives, if you will, in a way that honors the sacrifice that came before us? Well, we start right here by saying, what was it that these guys put together? What was this secret sauce, this formula that made our nation so free and so successful? And then what's our job? What can we do to help preserve it for future generations? I don't want you to leave this class saying, oh, that was kind of neat. You know, we got to come in and see where it all began, or, you know, we learned some stories about the founders we didn't know, and then go home and forget about it. I don't want anybody watching these DVDs and just saying, okay, that was kind of neat. We did that in our living room, our Sunday school class, or wherever we watched it, and then go home. No. My prayer is that you guys and ladies leave tonight, that those watching at home and those on the webinar tonight, that when this is over, you have a burden. I want you to have a sense of responsibility, that it is up to you to preserve this freedom for the next generation. In fact, I'm going to make a statement to you that you may think is a little bit overblown. My wife would probably say it's cheesy. She calls me the king of Velveeta sometimes. She just thinks I'm cheesy sometimes. But I think it's absolutely true. It's this. The fate of the free world depends on you. Fate of the free world depends on you. Now, you might say, all right, you're exaggerating, that's overblown. How many of you would agree the fate of the free world depends on America? Would you agree with me on that? How many of you understand that the fate of America depends upon her constitutional principles being upheld and preserved and protected? And how many would agree that the fate of her constitutional principles being upheld and preserved and protected depends upon the first three words of the Constitution, which is what? We the people. So if the fate of the free world depends on America, if America depends upon our constitutional principles, if our constitutional principles depend upon we the people, then friends, the fate of the free world depends on you. And so we're here to challenge ourselves, to dig deep into these documents to say, okay, what's my job? What do I go do as a citizen to preserve freedom? And I tell you, I'm seeing more of this than I've ever seen in my life. I mean, I've been doing this for 15 years, but I've never seen the level of activity in our nation. I've never seen so many people coming out to say, hey, I want to learn about the Founding Fathers. I want to know what freedom's all about. I want to know what the Constitution said. How many of you seen all these bumper stickers? How many driven by a car seen a bumper sticker that said, read the Constitution? Anybody seen one of those? Okay, a guy like me, I see that bumper sticker, I'm honking. Okay, I'm sorry. I get excited when I see that. But we've all said that for years. Read the Constitution. Everybody needs to read the Constitution. But we don't usually do it. Most people never actually pick it up. I didn't. I went through law school and was a legislator. I didn't read through the Constitution back then. In fact, I'll tell you what really got me fired up about actually studying the founding documents. I was sitting in my Capitol office back in Austin, Texas, back when I was a legislator. And I'm sitting in my office and I'm reading this poll, and the poll says, it was a Texas poll, so if you're not from Texas, you don't have to feel bad about this poll, but I'm betting your numbers in your state weren't any better. Here's what the poll said. The poll said that half of Texans, could not name one freedom out of the First Amendment. Not even one. There's 5 there that we love, we hold dear, we cherish, we'd fight for, we'd die for. Half of Texans couldn't even name one of them. 95% Could not name 2 of the 5. I was appalled. Then I tried to name them. Then it was me. I couldn't name them. And I thought, wow, I'm a legislator. I'm a lawyer. I'm a political junkie, man. I live, breathe, and eat this stuff. I'm doing it all. And I couldn't name them. I thought, what a shame. If I don't know what my freedoms are, if I don't know where they are, how am I going to defend it? How am I going to teach my kids these things if I don't know myself? So that actually spurred a piece of legislation I did back then called the Celebrate Freedom Week. And what it did, we actually numbered it to House Bill 1776. I just love saying that in this room. I don't know why. I had to stand in line to be able to get that number for the bill. So House Bill 1776. And what it did was it said every kid in Texas has to spend time studying these guys. Studying the Declaration and the Constitution, studying the men that gave them, studying the ideas that went behind them, and studying our military, and studying the sacrifices made. And we're not going to just gloss over it once in 5th or 11th grade and forget about it. We're going to teach it every single year so that we can pound it into the minds of our young people, so we can put it in their hearts and their souls so that they'll appreciate the freedom they've been given, and they'll be able to defend and protect it for future generations. So we passed that bill, and now we've got several other states that have passed it. We've got an effort happening all across the nation. If you're at home tonight watching on the webinar, you're watching this DVD, go to my website at rickgreen.com and click on Celebrate Freedom Week and pull up the page there, and it'll tell you what's happening in your state. You can click on your state, and it'll tell you the action steps you can take to help make this happen in your home state. It's a great way to make sure every kid's studying these wonderful documents that came out of this room right here. Can you imagine how much better our country would be if every kid in America was studying the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution? I mean, just imagine every single year. I hope you'll help us make it happen. Be sure and take that down as one of your action steps, hopefully, after this class is over. Let me just first say, folks, I'm no guru, okay? I am so blessed to get to work with some guys I think are gurus, guys like Ed Meese and David Barton and other guys like that, Matt Staver. I get to learn at their feet, and all I'm doing is I'm here with you as a fellow citizen. We're going to sharpen each other's countenance tonight. We're going to help each other open these documents and study them. So we'll have questions all night. Feel free to ask questions. We'll probably do them at the end of each section. You're going to stump me before the night's over, and it'll be fun. All right, let's just have a good time together learning to be better citizens. And the other thing about the class, we're not an exhaustive study. This is not a year-long program. In fact, the best analogy I know to think of, how many of you ever bought a computer or a monitor or a big TV or something, and it came with a quick start guide? the nice glossy thing you could flip out, just because, something like this where, hey, I just want to know where to plug everything in, right? I just want to get this thing working. I don't want to read the big, thick manual that came with it. I'm never going to read it. I want the quick start guide so I can make this thing work. That's what we're doing tonight. We're going to do the quick start guide to the Constitution. Why? So that we as citizens can get plugged in, so we can make sure the pieces of our government are properly plugged in and working correctly, and so that we can make corrections on it if we need it. If you look at my books back here, these are all the things that I'm trying to study to be able to do the quick start guide. So these are the big manuals and everything, and I'm trying, and you guys can help me distill this thing down to where citizens all over the country. Now you guys You've traveled here from all over the nation, so you love this, right? I mean, you're willing to read the big, thick manuals, and many of you probably already have. But most people back home aren't going to do it, are they? I mean, how many times have you tried to get people to study the Constitution, and even if you just give them a pocket Constitution, they never open it? What we've got to do is we've got to put some tools in their hands that they can quickly access how this country works, and they can quickly access how to be a part of it. So remember our goal. It's to identify our rights and then know how to protect and preserve them, how to properly do that. So that's our approach number one. Approach number two is we're not going to focus on judicial interpretation. We're going to focus on original intent. There's another analogy for this one. My mom actually gave this one to me. She was a bank teller when she was younger. And she said, as a bank teller, I went through all this training, and I handled all this money, and she said, Rick, they never gave me a counterfeit bill. They never showed me a counterfeit so I could feel it and know what it felt like. She said, no, what they did was they had me handle the real deal, the genuine article, so much so that when that counterfeit bill came through my fingers, I knew something's not right. Because I had worked with the genuine article so much, I recognized the counterfeit immediately. Same thing for us. We're going to study the real deal. We're going to study the Constitution itself. We're going to study the founders and what they said and did and how they acted when they were putting the Constitution in place. We're going to study the actual words of our founding documents. not on what some judge says that he thinks or she thinks that they meant. I think that's what's gotten us off course, is we've allowed judge after judge to pontificate on what some other judge said, about what some other judge said, about what some other, and we've gotten so far off course, and we got, you think about the freedom of religion now. We got so many tests on what the freedom of religion is, or when you violate that, or when the Establishment Clause is violated. I mean, Sandra Day O'Connor had her 3-part test, then her 4-part test, and her 5-part. I mean, everybody's got all their tests, right? And it's just confusing. Why? Because we've gotten away from studying the original itself and what the founders did. So our goal is original intent. Let me give you a couple of quotes from the founders on this. They said, on every question of construction, carry ourselves back to the time when the Constitution was adopted. And how about back to the room? I don't usually get to say that in a class. Let's carry ourselves back to the time. Here we are in the actual room where the Constitution was adopted. Recollect the spirit manifested in the debate. So what these guys were actually saying right here when they adopted the Constitution. And instead of trying what meaning may be squeezed out of the text or invented against it. In other words, instead of taking the words and, oh, well, today that word means X, Y, and Z, so this must be what the founders meant, or trying to invent some meaning into the Constitution to try to get an outcome on the judicial decision. Instead of doing that, Jefferson says we should go back to the time, study what these guys were actually saying, and he said then conform to the probable one in which it was passed. So these guys are going to speak to us tonight. They're going to tell us what they actually said about these different areas of the Constitution so that we can follow Jefferson's suggestion there. And then Madison, of course, the father of the Constitution, we'll hear a lot from him tonight. He said, I entirely concur in the propriety of resorting to the sense in which the Constitution was accepted and ratified by the nation. So in other words, you're going to figure out what it says. He says you go back to what these guys said when they adopted it, and then what happened in those individual states when they had their ratification debates. In that sense alone, it is the legitimate Constitution. So you want the legitimate Constitution, you go back to the beginning what these guys did. If that be not the guide, so if you go the other direction, if that be not the guide in expounding it, there can be no security for a consistent and stable Constitution more than for a faithful exercise of its power. So what do you get? Instead of having a stable Constitution and a clear understanding that stays true throughout time, and if you don't like it, you use Article 5 and you amend it. But instead of having that stable Constitution, what do we get? 3-part test on this, a 4-part test on this. Total confusion about what is or is not constitutional. Madison said, come back to the original if you really want to know. He said, what a metamorphosis would be produced in the code of law if all its ancient phraseology were to be taken in the modern sense. So when we think about phrases like general welfare, what did it mean back then? What did it mean in this room? Not what does it mean to us today, not what does it mean when a politician tells us what it means. What did it mean to these guys? We're going to talk about that too. The first in governing, this is James Wilson, by the way. Now this guy, he was in the room both times. He signed both the Declaration and the Constitution. He actually went on to be a Supreme Court justice, one of the first guys George Washington nominated to serve on the Supreme Court. So he's actually an original Supreme Court justice. He said the first in governing maxim in the interpretation of a statute is to discover the meaning of those who made it. Well, who made the Constitution? Guys that were in this room, right? The ones that ratified it back home. Those are the ones we got to, if you will, kind of crack open their heads, get inside their mind, figure out what they were thinking, what was the intent. And the last guy I'll give you on this is Joseph Story, Supreme Court justice that wrote about 94% of the opinions when he's on the court. He's actually called the father of American jurisprudence. He said, the first and fundamental rule in the interpretation of all documents is to construe them according to the sense of the terms of the intentions of the parties. These are the parties, folks. We're here, welcome to the party. We're here with the parties that actually gave us the documents, and we're going to hear from these guys and find out the original intent, not judicial interpretation. So, number one, it's not exhausted. Number two, we're going to use original intent, not judicial interpretation. Third thing in terms of our approach is we're going to do something that we don't normally get to do with the Constitution. We're going to take it as amended. Those of you that have studied it a lot, you probably had some of those frustrating days like I did. When I first tried to study the Constitution, I opened up my pocket Constitution and I said, you know, first thing I was curious about, I said, I want to know about this electoral college. I want to know where this school is in the Northeast that all candidates go to. I was hoping for a little laughter there. No laughter. Can we dub in some laughter there, camera guys? Okay. A lot of people really think that. They think the electoral college is some campus over, out here in the Northeast that all the candidates come to. No, it's the way we elect the president. So I said, I want to figure out how this thing works. I was always confused by it. So open up Article 2. Start reading about the presidency. 3 paragraphs in, guess what? This has been amended by the 12th Amendment. And what's your pocket Constitution do? It just underlines what's been changed, but it doesn't tell you what's been changed. So you got to flip over to the 12th Amendment and try to look at both of them and figure out, okay, what actually changed? What does it mean? And then 3 paragraphs into the 12th Amendment, this has been amended by the 20th Amendment. So I got Article 2 open, I got the 12th Amendment open, I got the 20th open, and I'm having trouble holding on to my pocket Constitution. And guess what? Article 2 is also amended by the 22nd and the 23rd and the 25th Amendments. So I got 5 amendments affecting Article 2, and I'm supposed to... I just went crazy. I am so thankful for my buddy Mike Haller. Mike put this thing together. He did meticulous work to put together this Constitution Made Easy, the tool we're going to use tonight. And I know you're going to, as the night goes on, you're going to think this green guy is really simple-minded, because I am. I need things to be explained. Okay, so Mike really helped me with this, and he laid out the Constitution as amended. What a novel concept. So the tool in your hands tonight, what you're going to be able to do is flip that thing open, and on the left-hand side of the page, we get the original, because I'm an originalist. I'm not for replacing that language. But we get the original on the left-hand side of the page, and then on the right-hand side of the page, we get the Constitution as amended. So the blue is all the amendments incorporated into the original, and it's in modern language. So that's the fourth thing we get is some plain language that makes it easy for people that haven't made a big study out of this to actually go and read through the Constitution very quickly. Well, part of what I love about that Constitution Made Easy is you can actually sit down and read the blue part, the plain language, in about 15 minutes. So people that have never been exposed before, you can hand that to them and say, hey, just sit down and read the Constitution. Just read through it real quick, and you'll find some things you never even knew were in there. You're going to be able to clarify some things you may not have been aware of before. So that's our approach. That's how we're going to do this. We got a lot to cover in a short period of time, and you'll find people say that David and I both, we talk about 90 words a minute. We've gusted up to about 350. I'm gonna try not to gust on up to 350 too often. In our echo chamber here, I'll do my best to keep the speed down, but we've got a lot of time together, and we're going to cover as much as we possibly can. So that's sort of our introduction to the process and what we're going to do, a little bit about our approach. We're going to talk about the seeds that were planted here, what the concepts were, because, I find it interesting that if you just read the documents and you don't really go back to the philosophy that undergirds them, the philosophy that was put in place, you can get off track very quickly. So we'll be back to talk about the seeds of liberty when we return. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Well, I don't know if you could tell there, David, I was a little excited to be in that cradle of liberty.
Such
in
a
that
cool
very
place
room.
to be.
Yeah. And you've recorded there several times. It's just something about being where it happened.
And it's, I always love looking back at George Washington's chair, and that, was it the rising sun or the setting sun on that chair? And boy, Franklin, that's such a cool story with that, but it's cool to be in that room.
I love it. So one of the things we talked about a lot, and we'll talk about a lot more throughout this course, is original intent.
Right.
Now, you wrote an entire book on this, a best-selling book on original intent, where you took all these documents in this room and really shared with us what was inside the minds of our founding fathers. Why is it so important to get that original intent?
Because that's where you get the most effectiveness. It's really hard to use a screwdriver as a shovel because it was not designed for that. So you can work all day long with a screwdriver and not dig something out. You have to know original intent, have to know how it's designed. It's like using the owner's manual. If you want the most out of your car, your TV, anything else,
and you're not saying people would misuse the Constitution and for
not.
something it wasn't intended to be used for.
You know how we talked at the beginning about human nature and principles, and that's what the Constitution works because it's based on certain principles. One of those principles is human nature, and absolutely it can be. And we'll cover this in future lessons, but that's why we have checks and balances and separation of powers, and the Founding Fathers told us about human nature, and because of that, they put principles in there to keep people from taking and abusing this. It won't stop it if we don't apply those principles, but they gave us some tools by which we can stop some abuse.
I like that analogy because now not just original intent, but original intended use. It's a good way to think of it.
It is. It is. And one of the things that's kind of a good example that you talked about, if we don't do that right then, you're talking about how we get off track, and you're exactly right. Here's a great example. This is one of the best-selling books in American history. It's one of the McGuffey Readers. They came out in 1830s and 40s and went through 120 million copies to this date. So, I mean, they have sold like crazy. So here is a 4th grade reader. And I just open up here to lesson number 9, Death at the Toilet. Wait a minute.
I have no idea. Yeah.
Why would they use such crude bathroom humor back in that day? Because back in that day, toilet is where we get the word toiletries, which is like your shaving stuff and your hair stuff. And well, toilet was really your vanity table, and that's why we call it vanity. So death at the toilet is death at the vanity table. And it deals with a young girl who was really cocky and pride and arrogant about how beautiful she was, and it turned into her demise.
Wow.
Well, we look at death at the toilet and say, I can't believe that you're such a crude human. No, you have to go back to understand what they were trying to do. Now, once we understand that, the principle's the same. The arrogance and the cockiness and the kind of stuff that they talk about with that girl, but it's not death at the toilet, it's death at the vanity table. Her vanity is what destroyed her. So that's the kind of stuff that still works, and it does have an impact. And that's why you want to go back and know original intent. We'll just go back where we started at the beginning with John Jay. These are the 6 things that we want every single citizen to be able to do. When you read and study the Constitution, number 1 is read the Constitution. Doesn't take 20 minutes, it's an easy thing to do. Number 2 is study the Constitution. Once you've read it, you kind of get the overview. Now go back and look at the things in it and start making the list.
And that's where we really are getting into the minds of the founders.
That's right.
We're studying what those words actually mean,
We
not
are.
just reading them.
And as we go through these next lessons, these other lessons, we're going to be studying what that meant and why they put that there and why that clause is there and what are they trying to do. So
is that why all of these books are important? Not just the words of the Constitution, but when you pull a book off the shelf that is one of these guys in this picture that helped give us the document, it gives you a chance to really find out what they were thinking when they did it.
And it helps set the tone of the times. If you understand, people accuse the Pilgrims all the time of being so bloodthirsty because they had the death penalty. So they did. They had 15 crimes that had the death penalty. But let's set the tone of the time. When they came to America from Great Britain, the country they left had the death penalty for over 230 crimes. So they've taken it from 230 death penalty crimes down to 15. I don't think they're bloodthirsty.
So that puts it in context.
Puts it in context.
If you just look at it by itself, you could get way off. But if you step back and see the big picture,
and that is the thing, you can get fixated on a particular issue, and you see so much of the trees, you miss the forest.
Yeah.
And that's why you read it to see the forest. Now let's go back and study some of the trees that are in the forest, and that's the second part. Third part is to be able to teach it. Once you see what's in there, teach it, especially the rising generation. But in this culture, with our poor education
it's
system,
all of us.
Teach all of us.
Yeah.
Teach. I love. There's a Bible verse in Song of Solomon 8:13 that says, "Your friends listen to your voice, so speak." Exactly. There, in this day and time, with what we have with social media, there's nobody who doesn't have a platform.
That's a good
There
point.
are people who will listen to you. There are people who will hear what you say on Facebook, do it on Twitter, whatever you got. Speak.
Might be 5 people, might be 5,000, but all of us have
whatever
some folks
you
we
got,
can influence.
you talk to your friends,
Yeah.
and that makes a difference. Then what you want to be able to do is know those constitutional rights. Now that you've read and studied and you started teaching them, you now recognize when somebody has crossed the line. Wait a minute, he can't do that. That's not constitutional. And then at that point, you can defend those rights. If they're coming after you or if they're coming after somebody else, you can assert those rights.
Yeah.
So you stand up, and those are the 6 things that everybody needs to be able to do with the
So
Constitution.
you can't have that perception. You won't know that those rights have been violated if you haven't done these first steps
that's
first.
right.
You got to study them and know.
See, I mean, you talked in there about how your mom, when they trained her as a bank teller, they didn't show her counterfeit stuff. They just let her handle the real stuff so much that she instantly recognized it. And we did the same thing in World War II. If you wanted to be able to recognize the enemy, you studied those enemy identification charts. So you studied all the enemy planes, all the enemy tanks. So when you saw it, you read, that's the enemy. Now we can defend and assert ourselves. We're going on offense.
Yeah.
You want to make sure you didn't get one of the Allied tanks. You didn't want one of the British tanks. So you studied. And once you studied, you could recognize when there was something wrong.
Yeah.
And that's what it takes.
Well, as we study, sometimes people today, if we're not doing a good job of this in our schools, then that means we need more tools. We've got to have the tools to be able to study.
And by the way, just so nobody gets intimidated over this thing, studying the Constitution and understanding it is not a hard deal. This notion that we get from law school is that only the 9 people in the Supreme Court really know what the Constitution
these high
is.
priests of the law.
I have been in several legislatures where I have, and it just tears me up. Legislators say, look, let's just go ahead and pass it, and the Supreme Court will tell us whether it's constitutional or not.
Yeah.
No. You took an oath to uphold it, and you don't have to be a brainchild to do this. And a great example of that is this little book right here. This is a book, an elementary book back in 1828, and elementary kids study this
So they're teaching the Constitution to elementary kids.
You
so
don't
these
wait
are
till you
little
get
kids.
to law school. You don't wait till it's postgraduate stuff. And the kind of stuff that they were having these elementary kids study, the questions they asked.
1828.
1828.
All right, so we're going all the way back. Though this is
pull
only
out some of the elementary questions.
Okay, so
Now,
these are
now
questions.
You're an attorney.
These are
You were a legislator.
Now what if I can't answer it? This is going to be bad, which I'm probably not going to be able to. So these are elementary school kids, and they're asking them, can the Congress punish piracy? That is robbery committed at sea, because we have some of that today. So this is actually a good question for today. You got Somali
The
pirates,
Somali
that whole
pirates.
movie about that the Captain
That's
Phillips.
international law. So can we in America do anything to punish other nations under our Constitution?
Yeah, how many people, I don't know the answer to that question off the top of my head, so what does the elementary catechism say? Yes, and all other crimes committed there, it can also punish offenses against the laws of nations. So there's another question, and in fact that's the next question. What do you mean by the law of nations? This is great. So this is done in a catechism way where
Look,
you ask one
elementary
question,
kids.
it raises the next question.
That's right, and
Yeah.
that's elementary kids. And I bet if you sit down in a law school and take third-year law students that are about to take their bar exam and run those questions through,
Yeah.
they won't have. So
No, it talks about mark and reprisal,
yeah,
all
and,
of these
and
things.
nobody knows what that is
Yeah.
anymore. And that actually is a very current thing that still goes on because it deals with restitution. It's a form of restitution. So there's a lot in there that's applicable. So do not get intimidated saying, I'm not that smart. You don't have to be smart. Founding fathers, remember, these were average guys. They were farmers. They were shipbuilders. They were, one of these guys was he was a shoe shine guy. He made leather shoes and kept shoes. They're common folks, and they did this for the common, average, everyday person.
So if they could do it, we can do it today.
They can do.
And if kids of yesterday in 1820, little kids could do it. So it was intended as an elementary catechism, but we need it for all of us today.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
Well, that's the whole idea of Constitution Alive. So when we come back, we're going to actually talk about the seeds of liberty. We're going to dive into some of these materials and talk about what was planted to give us such a successful formula here on Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green.
We have a Constitution that is the envy of the world. It was established for the rights and protection of all flesh, all people in the whole world. They knew they were doing something so unique that was the light of liberty in all the world. Let's do this. Let's come back and look at that recipe because it was structure, it was form, it was the system that they designed to check and balance to provide a double security. In fact, Alexander Hamilton said this balance between the state and the national government is of the utmost importance because it provides a double security to the rights of the people.
I think the next generation, although there's obviously concerns about the generation, but I get a chance to work with some of the amazing young people of this generation that are much more conscious of their role, their God-given calling, and their duty, and much more talented and much more on fire for the Lord than our generation ever thought to be. And those individuals can go and should go into all these areas of life, in the judiciary, in the legislature, in every field of possibility, and really be light in these dark areas and transform the culture. I think this generation is going to surprise a lot of people because there's so much negative about them, but I see God raising up Gideon's army in this generation. I'm telling you, when you work with this generation, you realize our generation can't even hold a candlestick to what God is doing in this young generation.
Well, that's it for week 3. What a great opportunity to have David Barton right here live with us, teaching on truth and courage, and then to get to visit Independence Hall, to actually be in that room and learn what the Founding Fathers were thinking. What was the philosophy behind the formula that produced the most free, most powerful, most benevolent nation in history? Well, we hope you enjoyed week 3. Next week, in week 4, we're going to start talking more about what the Founding Fathers actually designed in our Constitution. We're going to dive into those seeds of liberty, and then we're going to do a 30,000 feet view of the entire Constitution. We'll see you next week for Biblical Citizenship in Modern America.
So, did you guys enjoy that? I think it was pretty good. Yeah, it was a lot of information in a little bit of time, quite a bit of time. But yeah, I thought it was pretty interesting. I really like the truth aspect of that presentation. Just to follow up with what he kind of said real quick, I kind of looked it up back there in the back. During the first term of President Reagan, there was a senior policy advisor to the U.S. Department of Education. Her name was Charlotte Iserbert. She was a whistleblower, and she created a book entitled The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, a Chronological Paper Trail. And that was back in 1999. So if that was in 99, imagine what's going on today in our classrooms. So like I said before, I had never heard of any of this stuff before, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room hadn't either. I know Pastor Brad, whenever he was here for last week, I think it all blew us away that there was a point in time where the church was responsible for the movies that were being released. I don't know anybody that knew about that. So it was amazing. And I hope, the rest of the weeks that are left, I think there's about 4 left, 5 left, that they'll be just as informative as this one. So before we go, I'll pray out, but there are papers in the back here for the 30 days to unite in prayer. There is each and every single week there are different topics like pray for unity, pray for healing, pray for deliverance. So Jace has got a back from the back. Make sure you pick one of these up because it's got some pretty good stuff on there too. So I'll pray this out real quick. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time tonight. Lord, thank you for all this information that we're receiving about the country and the nation that you have given us and given us charge over, Lord. And Father, I just pray that the wisdom that we're getting through these videos help us become better biblical citizens so that we might be able to go out and share all the things that this great country, this great nation has done in pretty much your name, and continue it to make it a great country. Father, I thank you for the people that have shown up tonight, and even the ones that stayed this late. Father, I just pray blessings over everyone here. Lord, protect us as we go home tonight. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.